So a few weeks back, there was an article that came out, I believe it was from the Wall Street Journal, and in the article they were talking about Nintendo and how they're gearing up to release a new variant of the Switch in 2019. And while everybody has pretty much said all they can about this, I felt it was about time for me to chime in. I want to give y'all my 2 cents, my professional yet irrelevant opinion on said subject matter. Fashionably late, of course. When in actuality, y'all, I just bought Red Dead Redemption 2 and that thing is taking a long ass freaking time to install. I can't play Yakuza Kiwami, so that's just killing me on the inside. So here we are. The Switch XL, the Switch Pro, the Switch Slim and Light. There have been a lot of names to describe the Nintendo Switch variant. And to be honest, I welcome it. I welcome the idea of Nintendo coming out with a newer, beefier version of the Switch. I guess that's the TLDR, or would it be the TLDV? Because you know, TLDR is too long, don't read. TLDV is too long, don't watch. Anyways, anyone who has been a gamer for close to 20 years now, especially if you've owned Nintendo handhelds, you would know that this is kind of par for the course. Nintendo and hardware revisions go hand in hand like, what's the best way to describe this? I would say overhyped expectations and DC cinematic movies. Yeah, I feel like that is the best way to describe it. You know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? So there are 2 basic schools of thought when it comes to a hardware revision. You can do what Nintendo has done countless times before and make the system sleeker, slimmer, cater to the comfort for the consumer. They can go back and add in a couple of things that weren't in the previous model, like a microphone, maybe added Bluetooth support. And then, ooh, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we can get more we can hype ourselves up for a bit, because if Nintendo is coming out with a new model of the Switch, I don't want it just to be a simple, sleek model. I don't want it to be a Switch Mini. I want this thing to be a Switch Pro. I want this thing to have beefy freaking hardware, because being a Switch owner for the past year has opened my eyes to a lot of things. I love the idea that we can take these console quality games on the go. And you've heard this time and time again. The sheer fact that we can play games like Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Doom, and Skyrim, and now Wolfenstein 2, we can kill Nazis from the comfort of our car. Why are you playing your Switch when you're driving? You gotta think about that for a second before y'all hype it up. There's a lot of reasons to love the Switch. Its portable nature honestly is its best selling point, and in a lot of situations, we have to be real with ourselves, it's why we forgive a lot of the faults in the current model of the system. So if they were to come out with a Switch XL that has more power attached to it, just think of the possibilities. And I know this has been a major point of contention for a lot of people. They feel like this is going to split up the user base. They feel as if the early adopters have gotten screwed if they come out with a new version of Switch 2.5 years later that is so much more powerful. And to that, I would reply, where have you guys been for the past 10 years? Especially people who own multiple products that upgrade on a semi-annual basis. Anybody who owns a cell phone, you guys know that the second that they announce the new one, your reign of terror is over and done with. There is always a sleeker, more powerful version of your cell phone coming out. Now, of course, you can't really compare the idea of releasing a Switch model every year to releasing a cell phone model, but it's actually more familiar, if you will. The Switch is a handheld, right? The Switch utilizes mobile architecture. Cell phones utilize, obviously, mobile architecture. And while these cell phones come out on a regular basis, on an annual basis, your phones are not going to be too different from the previous year's model. My Samsung Galaxy S9 is not going to be 100 times more powerful than the Samsung Galaxy S8. So why would a Switch Pro that releases 2 years after the Switch be 100 times more powerful than the base model of the current Switch? When it comes down to developing these mobile devices, they know that they have to cater to the vast majority of consumers. So things are going to be backwards compatible. There is going to be a common denominator that exists. Of course, the Switch Pro is going to be able to play games much better. You might have an unlocked frame rate, you might have better visuals, better textures, and then when you dock it, you might be able to play the game at a higher resolution than 720p, which is what most games on the Switch render at. If you're lucky, of course. You know, some games render at 362p. I'm not going to get into that right now because I love that game so much, but oh, it is not pretty to look at, jeez. So the idea of them coming out with another Switch, I think is actually really cool, provided they make it so all of the games are uniform across the board. Sure, the Switch Pro is going to be able to play the games at a better resolution, better frame rate, better performance, but if the game is still able to run on the current model of the Nintendo Switch, I don't think too many people are going to be pissed off, especially some of the casuals out there who are just buying the Switch to play with their family. Are they really going to care too much that, I don't know, the next Mario Kart on Nintendo Switch runs 20% better on Switch Pro as opposed to the base model Switch? They're not going to care too much, mainly because they just want to play the game. And Nintendo is pretty good about optimizing their hardware. Like, look what they were able to pull off with a lot of their first-party games. And then you compare that to some of the third-party support on the system. Nintendo knows what they're doing. So I'm sure across the board, they're going to be able to mandate all of their developers and say, hey, you know, we're coming out with this game. You can make it run better on the Switch Pro, but make sure it runs well enough on the vanilla. And I think that's the only thing that we got to worry about going forward. You can get into the argument of, well, if the games run better on the Switch Pro as opposed to the Switch Mini, wouldn't that segment the online online gaming on a Nintendo system? Next! I also think that a more powerful Nintendo Switch will attract more third-party developers and publishers. Let's be real about life, you guys. Even though the Nintendo Switch is a powerhouse right now, it's selling 20 million units, there are still going to be some development teams who are not going to develop for it. And the perfect example that I can give to this is the Nintendo Wii. A lot of people say if the system is selling units, developers will flock to it. The Nintendo Wii missed out on 90% of the biggest third-party games that came out last generation. It sold 100 million. Shouldn't it have gotten all those games? No. Why? Because the hardware was too anemic and these developers didn't want to go the extra mile to make a custom version for the Wii. Guys, it's not just about the install base when it comes to the game development. If a developer has to go in and put extra manpower and time and resources into making this custom version where they potentially could not get the return on the investment, you can't really fault them for that. Sure, the Nintendo Wii sold 100 million units, but we didn't get games like Mass Effect on it. We didn't get the majority of the Call of Duty games. And whenever we got a third-party game, it was gimped because, let's be real about life for a second, the Nintendo Wii couldn't handle it the way the developers envisioned it. But if you come out with a Nintendo Switch Pro and we're able to get some of these games that exist on the current platforms, I think that this will help long term. Because by the time the next PlayStation and the next Xbox comes out and you have this Nintendo Switch Pro, you can get some of these games that would release, like some of these sequels that are coming out to games that started this generation, that are coming out on the PS5 and the next Xbox. You could get a version of them on the Switch Pro and they could run somewhat competently. Again, you could get into the discussion, well, if they can run somewhat competently on the Switch Pro, how in the world are they going to run on the regular Switch? Well, in that situation, for third-party games, it becomes a double-edged sword. In some situations, not all of them are going to want to develop for the original Switch. Nintendo, I assume, is going to make sure that all their first-party games run, but some of the third parties, if it came down to it, not releasing Resident Evil 2 Remake on the Switch and releasing Resident Evil 2 Remake on the Switch, but it's exclusive to the Pro, if they can get that extra money and they can find a new user base, I think they'll go the extra mile to make it exclusive. Like, we already know that Switch gamers support games. The Switch is install base. And the amount of games that are on the system and the amount of people that are supporting it, it should not be the way it is. People here are supporting Switch games more than those games on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. So could you imagine that with a big third-party game that's running at like 1080p, 30 frames per second on the Switch Pro? Or, 720p, 60 frames per second on the Switch Pro? You think people aren't going to eat that up? You think people aren't going to eat up games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey running competently on the Switch Pro? You think people aren't going to want to play Call of Duty Blackout on the Switch Pro, running at 60 frames per second on a handheld with little to no compromises, I think people will swallow their pride and be like, you know what, man, I'm gonna spend the extra $300 and get that Switch Pro. Obviously, this is just me painting it in an ideal world, like, oh, this is exactly how it's gonna work out. We don't know how it's going to work out. We don't know. Maybe Nintendo's not even coming out with a more powerful Switch. Maybe their Switch Pro is just a Switch that has, you know, a 2-hour battery life extension, which I would appreciate because those 2 hours go a heck of a long way. But in addition to that, I feel like if they do come out with the Switch Pro, even though I was kind of downplaying the slimmer, sleeker, obvious hardware revisions, I do think that they need to include a microphone. I think it needs to have Bluetooth support. I think that if they are going to come out with a new Switch, it has to have all the freaking features that the Xbox 360 did in 2005. I am beating a dead horse. Well, not a real horse right now, considering Red Dead is still installing at the moment, but you guys get what I'm saying. Something about horse testicles. So that pretty much wraps it up, ladies and gentlemen. The idea of Nintendo coming out with a Switch Pro, if you will, I am all for it. If they do decide to go the extra mile and beef up the system, I am there day one, because while I love the Switch and what it is able to give me as a gamer, it is not a perfect machine and there is so much more room for improvement. And that little extra bit of power could seriously go a heck of a long way. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think about this. From me to you for now, my name is NGS, signing out, and like always, I will catch you guys later. Peace.